Hello, everyone. Welcome to Education Superheroes Interviews. Today, we have Mr. Jon Bergmann with us. He's in Houston, Texas at the moment. He started the flipped classroom movement in 2007 and has been pioneering this course in education for so many years. And we've seen that flipped classroom has taken over many classrooms in the world, and it is becoming a norm. But at the same time, we still do face a lot of challenges when we try to flip classrooms. Today, we'll be talking a little bit about flipped classrooms, mastery learning, and how education is shaping up in 2021, given the fact that we just went through a paradigm shift and a massive transition due to the pandemic. Thank you for doing this with us, Mr. Jon Bergmann.
It's great to be on the show with you, and look forward to sharing what I'm learning.
The first question is about emergency e-learning solutions that have popped up in so many countries, at schools, at universities. There are a lot of success stories, and there are also stories where it hasn't gone over really smoothly. What's your take on the emergency e-learning setup?
First of all, I want to say kudos. Amazing amount of effort that teachers have done around the world to do what they can with what they've got. And I have seen the same things. I've seen some people step up and done amazing things for their students, but I've also seen really frustrated teachers who are feeling overworked and underappreciated. And yeah, and I've seen examples where it's been done well and examples where it's been done poorly. I've seen all the things that you're referring to.
When we talk about flipped learning and mastery-based learning as solutions to a lot of problems that educators and students are facing today, how well does it fare when we transition to the online learning space?
I think it's important to understand that flipped learning isn't just online learning. Flipped learning is really defined as, it's a methodology that allows us to reach every student. It does invert the classroom model by then, introducing course concepts before class. Now, fast forward, we live in the pandemic world. In the pandemic world, we don't have class time. I think the thing that really changed everything for people was we realized that we don't have class time. But then I think one thing that was so good about that is that we realized how super valuable face-to-face class time is with our students. Now, face-to-face time, by the way, can now be redefined. It doesn't have to be me in my classroom with my students. It could also be me in a Zoom room with my students. And so since you now have less class time with your students, everybody in the world has less class times, even those schools that are meeting face-to-face because of distance protocols and cleaning protocols and whatnot, you have less minutes with your students in the best case. And in the worst case, you have very, very few minutes with your students. So the question that flipped learning has always asked since its inception is this: what's the best use of your face-to-face class time? And again, that could be in a Zoom room, but that question must be answered. And then flipped learning, of course, answers the question with a very sort of a non-answer. It says that we shouldn't be using our class time, our valuable class time, for information transfer. We need to use, flipped learning uses two spaces, the independent space and the group space. The independent space is where the student works alone. The group space, of course, is where they're in a group. It would be a Zoom room, it could be a classroom or whatever it might be. And the big idea is that you do the easy stuff, the information transfer, in the independent space, and you do the hard stuff when you're face-to-face with your teacher. That's the key to it. And frankly, flipped learning teachers, somebody said this on Twitter, it's not original to me, but he said this. He said, flipped learning teachers have been preparing for the pandemic for the past 10 years.
Yep.
And I mean this, every single flipped learning teacher I've talked to has been tapped by their school to help out in the pandemic because they know how to do this. Not perfectly, right? But they are way ahead of the vast majority of their peers.
Yes, and we recently had a webinar with teachers from around the world joining in, and we were doing it on the flipped learning model. And one of the prime concerns that many of the teachers seem to have was when we do flip a classroom, what do we do if students don't go through the material that we send them? That's always been one of the main concerns when we do try to flip classrooms. The solution that we offered was, instead of having the students passively receiving information in the form of videos and other content, it might be a great idea to initiate another change where the student is not just the receiver of information, but also the creator. because today in our digitally connected world, information is abundantly available and students have access to all sorts of information. I just recently saw a video that you put up about molecular force, I think yesterday, and it explained it quite nicely. I didn't even understand it as well when I was in high school. So I think information is readily available, and getting students to use that information, do some research, and then create material might be a better approach than to just have them passively receive information. What do you think about that?
Well, let me sort of answer with two, I believe, well, maybe three big answers. The question you asked at the beginning, what do I do if I don't watch them? That's been the question about flipped learning since its inception. And there are lots of big answers on that. And I think, there's probably 10 answers to make it better. So if make sure that you actually assess it, that you check that they're doing the work, that there's lots of little strategies that help you to get more students watching it. So that's that question. Should students be making their own videos? Absolutely. In fact, that's actually something, again, I've written about this, and now I'm actually doing it. I'm now copying a teacher from the US who did this, who was a history teacher. And what I have my students do, and I teach high school kids, and my high school students, they make a video as their final project. They pick whichever topic they want, and their goal is to make a video better than mine.
Okay.
And then the next year, which is now this year, this is my second year at this school, my students just watched a video just in the last week on the anatomy of a volcano that wasn't my video. It was made by one of my students from last year. And so they are now, then they're kind of getting a sense that they can take some more ownership. So I think that's very valuable if you can bring that in. But then maybe this isn't what you're asking, but I think maybe one of the other keys to making it more accessible to students, and there's a lot of research about this, educational research, is you need to make that independent space more social. So that it's not just them passively watching a video, you want them to actively watch a video. And so one tool that I'm using this year, I would highly recommend everybody take a check at it. It's developed by a couple of Harvard professors. It's called Perusall, PERUSALL.com. And it's a social learning platform. So I upload my videos to Perusall. Actually, I linked them from YouTube. And then when the student watches the video, they pause and they make comments. And then everyone can see in the class each other's comments, and they can comment on each other's comments. So there's actually a conversation about the video happening inside the video. And then even super cooler, a couple of crazy Harvard smart people did this. It also grades their responses. It has an assessment. Artificial intelligence is looking behind and kind of grading their responses. And it's super cool. And it really has taken the interactivity up a notch, because learning is social. You want to make the group space social. I've been doing that pretty well, because I'm doing this in a group with kids in the same room or in the same Zoom room. But how do you make the independent space social? This is an app that seems to really be working, at least for me. There's probably other ones. I know other teachers are doing this, like with Google Forms, where they are, maybe they're LMS or Blackboard or something like that, and then they're having kids type, responses to the video somehow. But this has been the tool that's really worked for me.
Yep, we're actually in the process of developing something along the lines of having an interactive social platform where students can exchange videos. So it's a 90-second video that any student can upload. And this could be about anything that they're experiencing at the moment. So it could be while they watch sports, or while they, cooking, and they can have a question about it. And then other students and educators on the platform can respond with another 90-second video. So it's no longer just typing in comments, but it's also creating. So constantly creating content on this platform. It's still in the works, and we're still building it and making it perfect. It's called Let's Flip. And Let's Flip is what we hope, will be the new platform where students can create and engage with each other's videos. To take this idea that learning can happen only in a classroom space or only during an assigned time away, and replace it with an always on, always learning model where students can just ask questions about things that are happening around them, engage with reality in a different way using this app. So that's something exciting we're working on. My next question is really about how early can we flip? How early can we start flipping? And how does that affect learner autonomy, creativity, and global citizenship?
Well, I've seen kindergarten students flipping, the teachers flipping in their classes. And I wrote a book called Flipping the Elementary Classroom, or Flipped Learning for Elementary Instruction, I think is the official title. So I interviewed dozens and hundreds of teachers, I guess, about teaching this at the elementary level. So it certainly can be done. When you get the youngest grades, you don't have them in a dedicated LMS. What often happens, as I see this happening in kind of a station rotation model, now this is pre-pandemic, it's much harder to do this clearly, to teach pandemic if you're teaching the little ones. It's very hard, but it does work, and I've seen it work. And in fact, like the first flipped school in all of New Zealand was a primary school, and they have completely flipped. I was visited the school some years ago, and they started the process, and it's an amazing place. So yeah. One other thing that you notice, just sort of a second question you should ask about learner autonomy, the thing that you discover in a flipped classroom is that by definition, it enhances learner autonomy. I mean, obviously some teachers are going to be more, shall we say, control freaks, and even in a flipped learning setting, but it really lends itself to giving students more autonomy and learning. So I've never met a teacher who hasn't seen more autonomy in their classroom, learner autonomy, who was flipping. And honestly, I think this is the answer to the pandemic. I mean, especially, I know you want to talk about mastery, but I think mastery has got to be in our vocabulary in the next year, because so many students have gaps, huge gaps, because of the pandemic, because some students have received a very good education, but many have not. And the ones who have not are behind, and then you mix them back into the schools, and now you can't just put them, you know, as Sir Ken Robinson had said in, I think, his TED talk, you know, we arrange them by their, you know, date of, what do you call it, product date or something like that. You know, you can't just put them in your age groups, because some students are going to be way behind and some are going to be ahead or on target or whatever. And the only way to do that, I think, is in a mastery model. And the only way to really do mastery well is by flipping it.
So you just spoke about the digital divide and access to emergency e-learning solutions. In many countries, India included, this is a big problem. How do you think equity figures in this equation, especially if we were to go back to a completely bricks and mortar space?
I'd say, first of all, I'm a fan of brick and mortar schools. For the vast majority of students, I think we need them in brick and mortar schools. I just think we need to rethink how we use our brick and mortar schools. Yeah. But that said, there's no question that in many countries, the equity issues are huge. And I know in your country, in India, that is, as a parent, I've been to India, and I've seen the divide, and it's stark and sad. All I can say is this is a point when I get the opportunity to talk to people who are in leadership and in government. It's like, you got to step up to the plate. If you really believe in equity, you've got to provide access for your most disadvantaged students. And clearly, you know, access to the internet and the resources that are there is something that every student needs access to, or they won't be able to compete in this world, this globally interconnected, competitive world, without that access. So that's where I don't have the purse strings of the world, but boy, that's something I think should be a priority over many other things that we have. So I'm not sure I have the answer to that, except that, I mean, and that's a big answer, because number one, it's not just providing a computer and internet connection, it's also providing a trained teacher who knows how to do it. Because I had a chance to visit with some of the folks who were early on in the you know, a laptop for every child, I think is what it was called. It was out of MIT. I talked with some of the founders of that, and they talked about some of their early failures where they had provided laptops, but they did not provide the teacher training, and it really didn't work out very well in some countries that were really struggling economically. So this needs to be like a massive effort by the world educators and the politicians to make this happen.
Like you said, you know, providing a computer is not enough. You also need to provide trained teachers. In India, it's a unique demographic. Even though every family doesn't have a computer, they definitely do have a mobile phone with some kind of an internet connection. And therefore, you know, a lot of learning is moving on to this mobile platform. We have started an initiative. It's called the Greatest English Classroom. And our idea is quite simple. What we're doing is we're connecting global educators, teachers in Spain, the UK, Singapore, with students in any country possible. So what we're doing is we're trying to change the model of English learning, where you sit in a classroom, work with a textbook, and interact with the same teacher every day. This really helps us bring global educators into the classroom every week. and the students then learn how to communicate with these educators, and that helps them build confidence. So the Greatest English Classroom also has another wing, which is called Education Superheroes. That's where we train the teachers how to use this platform and how to reach out to students across this platform. So I think this is something that has come out of this transitional energy that the pandemic has brought with it. Everyone is trying to do something new, and everyone's trying to engage with their students in different ways. So if you could think of an educational model or a solution that could come out of this transitional energy, other than flipped and mastery-based learning, what do you think that would be?
Well, and maybe I'm just a one-track mind, but I think the model is flipped mastery. When in 1984, Benjamin Bloom wrote a paper called the double sigma effect, and he challenged the world to find a model that was as good as one-on-one tutoring. So as he examined the research from his long esteemed career, the best way for students to learn with a two standard deviation improvement in scores is one-on-one tutoring. But he also demonstrated that mastery learning, when done well, is a one standard deviation improvement. And he made a statement, and I'm going to misquote it, but I'll be close. He says, if somebody were to find a method that is as good as one-on-one tutoring or small group tutoring, that is easy to implement, right, and can be taught to the average teacher in a reasonable amount of time, it would be a achievement of the greatest magnitude. And honestly, I think flipped mastery is that answer, because in my flipped mastery class that I will see tomorrow morning when I walk into my school, my students are learning at not exactly their own pace, but at the pace I set a pace, but it's also a flexible pace for my students. And even with the pandemic, so I teach at a school that has been meeting for the most part face-to-face this school year. We were all remote in this last spring, March, through the end of the school year in June. And then we started up partially meeting, and now we're completely meeting-ish. I mean, there's protocols and safety things, of course, as many are. But I had a student who just showed up at my school. We started our second term, our second semester just a bit ago. And she showed up, and I said, it's a chemistry class, and this is the second semester of a chemistry class. And I said, tell me what you know about chemistry. And long story short, she doesn't know much. Even though she had chemistry at her previous school, what had happened is that because it was completely remote, she really did not get a very good education. And I said, that's fine. Good news is this is a mastery course. I'm going to start you right where you're at. And she is now progressing one step at a time through the content. She's actually working at a very good pace. I'm very, very proud of her. And I think she's going to catch up to her peers. It's not her fault that she went to a school that didn't do learning well. It's not her fault. It happens, right? Especially pandemic. I don't blame her teacher. So yeah. I guess I would say it's flip mastery needs, because especially as we talked about, I don't know, maybe earlier, whether it was recorded or not, I don't recall, but we were saying that in the mastery model, we have so many kids coming into our schools with so many different gaps. And so mastery seems to be the only way that makes any real sense. So, I mean, but to sort of go back and really answer your question, if I were to summarize all of the educational research that I've ever read, and I've skimmed a lot, I'm not a researcher. I don't have a PhD, don't really want one. I really value people with them, but I would say this. Educational research says two things. It says, number one, active learning wins. So you need to make your class active. And number two, relationships matter. That the connections that a teacher makes with their kids and with each other too, for that matter. And that's an oversimplification, I know, of all the educational research. And the question is, how do we make active learning a reality and not passive learning? And so I believe that flipped learning is like the easy button to get there. I said this in my TED Talk. I quoted a study from 15,000 US chemistry professors, and I forget the exact percentage, but a high percentage of them were flipping. But it said that almost all of them were doing active learning. And then it said those who weren't flipping only had a 1 in 16 chance of doing active learning. So that means, I'm not arrogant enough to say the only way to do active learning is flip learning, but it's the easy way. Yeah. So it's as Bloom had said, something that could be taught to teachers that wouldn't be so crazy hard for them to do. I've seen active learning at other schools. I've visited schools across the world. I've seen some amazing examples, and they've got to active learning, not through flipped, but they're still amazing schools. But I think it's the easy way to get there. So I guess the big answer, it's always got to be active learning plus relationships. How you get there, I don't know. I mean, I think I know how to get there is through flipped, and I think particularly with mastery.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bergmann, for your time. I think the last message is something simple and easy for teachers around the world to remember and hold on to as they struggle through their daily routine of, getting the classes active and interesting for students, especially on the Zoom platform, because they're faced with a lot of other hurdles along the way. So thank you for that simple and easy advice that teachers can keep in their mind, is to keep your classrooms active and to make sure that you're working on relationships while you teach.